In this video lesson, we will describe the founding of New York, founded by the Dutch, and Pennsylvania, founded by William Penn, pictured here, and explain why these two settlements, as well as the other middle colonies, became so ethnically, religiously, and politically diverse. We'll also describe the central features of the middle colonies and explain how they differed from the New England colonies and the southern colonies. By the early 17th century, Holland had emerged as a major commercial, military, and colonial power after a protracted war to free itself from Catholic Spain. In the East Indies, the Dutch maintained their empire for over 300 years due to the early success of the powerful Dutch East India Company, with its army of 10,000 men and its fleet of 190 ships. In the Caribbean, Africa, and Brazil, Holland had established profitable colonies through the less powerful Dutch West India Company, with most of its energy focused on the East Indies. In the time period 1623 to 1624, Holland's Dutch West India Company established New Netherland on the Hudson River. Its center of trade was the town of New Amsterdam, which was a company town. New Netherland is present-day New York, and the city of New Amsterdam is present-day New York City. You can see on this map, which was circa 1660, there are some things that remain in present-day New York City. You can see a wall along this side of the map that was used to protect the colony from enemies. That wall is present-day Wall Street. You can see a very broad street here on the map. That street still exists today in New York City, and that is called the Broadway. The colony was tightly controlled by the company's stockholders and by governors through appointed directors general. The governors did not permit religious freedom, democratic practices, free speech, or anything which might interfere with the colony's profitability. Vast feudal states called patroonships were granted to land promoters who agreed to settle 50 people on their estates to work for the benefit of both landowners and the company. Within the colony, members of the Calvinist Dutch Reformed Church and Quakers were subjects of suspicion and savage abuse, and they were not treated fairly. Despite strict measures, New Netherland attracted a cosmopolitan population from different countries, mostly of whom, including Dutch settlers, felt no particular loyalty to the company or the colonial governor. In 1664, England's King Charles II granted the land occupied by New Netherland to his brother, the Duke of York, without regard for Dutch claims. The Duke of York is pictured here. The Duke of York, supported by a squadron of English warships, appeared off the coast of New Amsterdam and demanded that Governor Peter Stuyvesant surrender the colony. Peter Stuyvesant is pictured here. Stuyvesant, lacking strong defenses, ammunition, and citizen support, surrendered New Amsterdam without firing a shot. It was renamed New York, and this territorial acquisition gave the English unbroken control of the Atlantic seaboard from Maine to the Carolinas. Still, Dutch influences survived in New York, including its aristocratic flavor, monopolistic land practices, architecture, places named such as Harlem, Brooklyn, Hell's Gate, social customs and folkways such as Easter eggs and Santa Claus, sauerkraut, bowling, skating, golf, waffles, and many, many more. In 1681, King Charles II granted William Penn a huge tract of fertile land lying west of the Delaware River and north of Maryland, as compensation for a monetary debt owed by the Crown to Penn's father, who had passed away. His father had served Oliver Cromwell during the interregnum period, and then Charles after the Restoration. Penn, who was a Quaker convert, sought to establish an asylum for Quakers from the persecution they suffered under England's civil and religious authorities. William Penn is pictured here. Pennsylvania's population grew very rapidly, partially because Penn had a very strong advertising style, because of the thousands of Dutch, Welsh, Swedish, and English squatters that lived there. But the colony grew very, very quickly because Penn advertised very heavily in Europe. Pennsylvania's government was remarkably fair and tolerant. They paid Native Americans for their land. They welcomed the Native Americans to live among them in peace. They outlawed any tax-supported state religion. They permitted freedom of worship even to people who were Jewish and Catholics. They placed no restrictions on immigration. They imposed the death penalty only for murder and treason, made the naturalization process easy, and also made no provision for a military or a militia. These provisions reflected very deep Quaker devotions to principles and convictions that embraced opportunity, but hated strife and warfare. Quakers also believed in an open and generous God who loved all people equally. They believed egalitarian church services in which men and women could assume positions of religious leadership, and they avoided the creation of a social hierarchy based on class, which they considered false and evil. This picture presents William Penn in the center, making his treaty with the Indians. He also had a court system where disputes between Native Americans and white settlers could be decided by juries of both Native Americans and white settlers. Despite their liberal views, Pennsylvania authorities passed blue laws prohibiting ungodly revelers, stage plays, card playing, dice, games, and excessive hilarity. By 1700, Philadelphia had a population of 5,000 and had become a thriving commercial center, involved in importing and exporting trade in grains, manufactured goods, and textiles with the West Indies. William Penn himself only spent 4 years in the colony before returning to England, where he suffered a few tragic remaining years, in part because he maintained a close friendship with deposed Catholic monarch King James II. Authorities in England arrested Penn 3 times on charges of treason and threw him in a debtor's prison for a time. After suffering a paralytic stroke, Penn died in poverty. Now, William Penn sits atop the City Hall building in Philadelphia as this statue.